If you ever ask a transgender person what it was like growing up, a lot of them will give you a similar answer. A lot of people will say, oh, they just felt different, or something kind of just felt wrong. Everyone's story is a little bit unique, and here's mine. This is going to be a bit of a long one, so strap in. Maybe some of you can even relate. When I was a kid, I grew up in a traditional conservative family. Normal, as most people would call it. My mom and dad, still married, both filled their stereotypical white American, lower middle class gender roles. Mom stayed home during my early years, but eventually made her way back into the workforce. Dad worked hard at a sales job, and I have one brother who's just a couple years older than me. I'm not gonna say my parents had favorites, but come on. I was the baby. Growing up, they put my brother and me into sports. My brother took to everything athletic, and he still loves being active to this day. Me though? Not so much. Well, not at all. To say I was uncoordinated is an understatement. But I persisted. For years. And I was never really sure why. I just knew I didn't like it. Well, let me tell you younger folks that there was a time before everyone had such easy access to the internet, and computers were not nearly as common a household item as they are now. I didn't have much knowledge, understanding, or even access to ideas outside of what I was taught by my parents or the social circles that they had me frequent. These social circles, of course, were sports-oriented people with stereotypical societal roles put up on a pedestal as the ideal way to be. So, as a young, impressionable kid, I thought that's how I was supposed to be. No matter how much I hated it, how much I wanted to do other things, how much I didn't really get along with the other kids. Which, of course, we all know how cruel kids can be to each other, especially when one of them is perceived as an outcast. I think in a child's life, when they start experimenting with activities they truly enjoy, their perception of themselves, their self-confidence, and their enthusiasm towards exploring the things that are actually interesting to them is at its most fragile. Encouragement, whether or not you agree with their choices, is key to how that child will approach their wants and desires in the future. For me, I desperately sought the acceptance of my interests from my parents and the people around me. Although my parents were never mean or discouraging, there was always this pressure for me to do the things that they wanted me to do. Be in sports, get away from the cartoons and video games. They gently guided me away from the things that I so desperately loved. My child brain began to associate my own interests with a feeling of shame. And that feeling infected every new idea that I grew interested in. I started to think that if I liked something, then society won't, because I just don't know the difference between what's proper and what isn't. If a child is enthusiastic about something and wants to tell you all about it, let them. Encourage them. Even if it seems like something silly and meaningless, encourage their excitement. Let them enjoy it. If you don't let them enjoy it, they'll become less and less enthusiastic about everything they do until it finally becomes a challenge to find the joy in anything at all. This is what happened to me. I eventually got to the point where I couldn't tell the difference between if I actually enjoyed something or if I just enjoyed the approval of others. This followed me long into adulthood. When you spend long enough practicing only seeking the approval of others, it leaves you in a place where you really can't find the joy in anything without it. Your psyche becomes fragile, and as you age, it becomes more and more difficult to accept criticism without spiraling into a pit of depression and beratement of your own self-worth. So, bringing it all back around, what does this have to do with my understanding of my gender? During these formative years, I was an emotional child. I was one of the criers up into elementary school. I mean, I was already being bullied for being small and nerdy, and I was really small and nerdy, these were just kind of compounding effects. I was constantly bombarded on multiple fronts that this is not how a man was supposed to act. Men are tough, they don't cry, they control their emotions, they play sports. I also saw these representations on TV of how men aren't supposed to care about things like grooming or style. It's manly to be rugged to the point of damn near feral, with these big mangy beards and large muscles and cool scars from working like a real man. I embodied absolutely none of these traits. Then, somewhere between the ages of, probably 8 and 10, I got curious. There were a couple very rare and brief occasions where I was home alone. And during these times, I would sneak into my mother's closet, try on her heels, and try to imagine what it would be like to be a girl. These are probably my earliest memories of exploring the boundaries of my gender identity and expression, even though I had never even heard of any of these concepts at this point. I wouldn't hear about them or learn about them for a long time later. This was essentially just my little secret that I was ashamed of. As I got older, my curiosity grew. My school curriculum never mentioned a word about LGBT terminology, and also I lived in conservative suburbia. The only way I could learn about the queer community was on early to mid 2000s sitcoms. Needless to say, it was rare and mostly comedic caricatures. Also, the words queer, fag, and gay were all used rampantly as insults by kids and adults alike. I only knew of one openly gay student in my high school of over 3,000 students. I wasn't interested in him, at least not in that way, but instead, how he maneuvered social situations had my attention. He had stereotypically flamboyant behaviors, which I was taught were wrong and something someone should be ashamed of. Yet, he was kind of popular. He was authentically, unabashedly himself at all times. Something that I wasn't. This is probably the time where I can really trace back the origins of my truly blossoming depression. Mental health, as it stood, was also conveniently left out of our high school curriculum. Throughout this time, I had a lot of thoughts about how my life would be so much different if I had been a girl going through high school. Of course, I tried suppressing those thoughts every time they came up because I was taught they were wrong, and I would mentally beat myself up every time that it happened. Also, I thought at the time that what I was hoping and wishing for wasn't possible. Of course, magic doesn't exist like it does in movies and TV, so I would never be able to understand the feeling of navigating the world as a woman in any shape or form. I was just condemned to have these thoughts and hatred of my own self for the rest of my life in a form of quiet, desperate solitude, because even attempting to speak to someone about it would elicit a negative reaction from a community that raised me to believe that even having these thoughts was bad. And trying to speak to someone about it would be opening myself up to even more ridicule from a world that already treated me like garbage. So, through high school, I was quiet, awkward, and depressed. It was the first time that I had suicidal thoughts. And no one could know. Because that's what I was told it meant to be a man. Suck it up. Tough it out. And then I joined the military. The logical next step. I spent so much time trying to fit the mold of what I thought other people wanted me to be that I spent no time figuring out who I actually was. So I didn't want to waste a ton of money going to college with no direction. I also thought I had something to prove. I would show the world that I was worth being called a man. I refused to let myself be bullied anymore. I would be the strongest, the best. Life became a competition. Against who? I don't really know. Maybe the invisible foe that was breathing down the back of my neck constantly, ready to rip into my insecurities at any given moment. I was under the impression that this time was going to force me to figure out who I was, and also figure out what it was I was passionate about. It didn't. I continued having thoughts about being a woman, and I continued hiding them. Being able to suppress these thoughts and hide them was probably the strongest skill I had learned while in the service. I got really good at keeping secrets where it mattered. I appeared to be the epitome of perfect mental stability and great physical health. For 4 years, I completely disguised myself. As I figured out what other people wanted, I shapeshifted into that instead of actually being my own self. When you spend so much time unable to be yourself and hiding yourself away, usually one of a few things happen. Some people sink into a deep depression. You can get lost trying to define yourself by other people's standards, and this means you have no North Star guiding you to a sense of fulfillment. You don't even know what fulfillment means at this point. And this is the common understanding by mass media and kind of the world at large. But this isn't exactly what happened to me, but you can kind of sprinkle in some of those elements. What I did was a complete suppression and masking of my own identity with something exactly opposite in order to gain approval. I became the jokester, the class clown, armed with a never-ending supply of self-deprecating humor that eventually became the cornerstone of my personality. I had to keep everyone laughing in order to distract them from getting too close and realizing who I really was. When you do this, all your interpersonal relationships become shallow since no one really gets to know you. You end up seeking constant validation from others just to reinforce that the facade is working as you dig yourself ever deeper into an indescribable loneliness. Even if you have a partner, as I found out. The longer you do this, the more difficult it is to tell people about other aspects of yourself. Your inability to talk about yourself starts pervading every part of your life, and soon enough, it starts to drive people away. Someone once said about me that I wouldn't have shit to say even if I had a mouthful. And they were right. I couldn't. I had built my personality on a structural foundation of secrecy. This ruined multiple years-long intimate relationships I had with multiple people. And since I was never committed to figuring out who I was, I never had a career that I could find fulfillment in. I hopped around different jobs for years and years. I got a degree in a field that really isn't very practical. Listless wandering was probably the best way to describe it. Then, I finally couldn't take it anymore. My life was a building that was crumbling around me. I needed to tear it all down, start anew. I could no longer live the hidden life that I had suppressed for so long. It was either that or, well, honestly, I don't know what another option would be. What another option could be. I looked around online, as one does, and finally realized what I thought it meant to be transgender. And it was me. I came out on December 2nd, 2020. I will never forget it because Elliot Page decided to come out less than 24 hours before my plans to come out. I still love you, Elliot. Jerk. In the following 3 months, I lost my job. I moved. I separated from my partner of almost 7 years. I started hormone replacement therapy, and I came out to my family. Oh, and it was the first holiday season of the pandemic, so I wasn't exactly able to go to my friends for support, And I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty miserable. But it was a year of new beginnings in a lot of ways. And I really needed it. Fast forward again, a couple years later, here I am on YouTube, putting up a video I actually enjoyed creating. It's really, really cathartic to finally put form to the thoughts that I had had for such a long period of time in my life. Now, am I saying that you are transgender and coming out will solve all of your problems and make you happy? No, absolutely not. This was a personal decision that took almost 3 decades for me to live through, understand, and come to terms with. Have I reached the state of gender nirvana or blissful life satisfaction? No, far from it. I still work through my issues on a regular basis, but it's better. A lot better. It's better because I'm finally learning to live life for me as the real me. And that is truly satisfying. If you made it this far, thank you so much from the very bottom of my heart. I know there were some pretty big time skips in there, but this video was already going on long enough, and I think we really hit the major points. This video was in no way meant to convince or persuade anyone to be anything that they are not. This short summation of my own story within this video is just a blip compared to the decades that I spent trying to learn who I am. If there is one single lesson I could impart from this whole story, I would say this. Just be you. Whatever you do, just be you. Be unabashedly you. Thanks again. Check the link down in the description to support me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!